Affairs don't begin in the bedroom, they begin in childhood. In the part of you that decided she needed to bury her truth just to be loved. The part that's now screaming to be seen. I'm Alex Croxford, and this is the Deeper Love podcast, where we name the shame, face the guilt, and help you find your way back to yourself. So let's begin. 6 years ago, I genuinely didn't know if I wanted to keep living. The shame of what I had done was unbearable. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't be present. I couldn't imagine a future where I felt okay again. And yet today I am sitting behind a microphone telling that story publicly. So what happened? How did I get from there to here? Because I can tell you, it wasn't time. It wasn't understanding what went wrong in my relationship. And it definitely wasn't listening to podcasts. So the year after I cheated on my ex-husband, I was determined that the way I was going to get over this was by forgetting it. I would just almost watch the days pass, thinking if I can just forget about it, then I will never need to tell him. No one ever needs to find out, and we can just carry on and live happily ever after. And I will not be drowning in the shame and guilt in the future. In some way, it's going to just disappear from my body. To be honest with you, I felt like I had no other choice at that time, because we were also about to start our first round of IVF, and we had also signed ourselves up to have a huge side return extension done on the house. And my then husband was going through his exams to become an accountant. And he had been working so long for these exams, and it felt like I was boxed in. I had nowhere to turn, because if I told him, then all of these three things were going to collapse on the floor, and I didn't want to ruin his life. I didn't want to ruin my chances of having a baby, because at the time I felt so old, which is hilarious looking back, but I was 35 and I didn't have regular periods, and the doctors were telling me how hard it was going to be for me to get pregnant. So I felt like this desperation for a baby, and terrified that if I told him, then I was going to take that chance away. And then, of course, on top of all of this, doing a huge extension on the house, having to live in the top 2 floors of our house whilst there was dust everywhere, cooking off a camping stove, chopping vegetables on the trestle table. Oh, that was hard. That was so hard. But I felt like I had no other choice. And all through that, I managed to look functional on the outside, but inside I was completely and utterly falling apart. There was this intense pressure in the middle of my chest, which I didn't know what it was. It was like almost stopping me from breathing. And I was constantly in my head, obsessively thinking about whether or not I should leave my marriage, whether or not I should tell my husband, whether or not I should tell my best friend, what should we do about the IVF? Should I put an end to this? I remember going to have acupuncture whilst I was running up to IVF, and the acupuncturist would say, "So is there anything you're stressed about at the moment?" And I'm like, no, nothing stressful. And inside, the turmoil was off the scale. I was also working on a really stressful show, and it felt just like life was so much. but I didn't want anyone to know what I was struggling with. So I would go to the toilets and I would cry secretly. And I did have one friend that I would speak to, but 99% of my friends had no idea. And it just meant I felt so disconnected. I felt so alone. I felt like I was drowning and I had no way of getting to shore. I thought I was just horrific. I thought I was such a bad person. And I didn't know how I was going to get out of it. And the truth is, back then, I thought the problem was the affair. But looking back, the affair wasn't actually the thing that I needed to heal. The affair was the thing that exposed everything that had been running underneath my life without me even realizing. And as I began to peel back the layers, and the work I was doing worked in both the body and the mind. This wasn't just talking therapy. But what I began to understand was that I had been living a life wearing a mask of perfectionism. And I had created what looked like the perfect looking life on paper. And I had the house and the skinny body and the Gucci handbag and the party lifestyles, going to Soho House at the weekend. And I was jetting around the world on first class flights for my job as a TV executive. I had my husband. I really had created the image of perfection on the outside. I was also the one that was always achieving. I set my mind to something and I would go and get it. I climbed the ladder to executive in TV, which is exactly what I wanted to do. I got really good grades at school. I'd always been the high achiever. I was the head girl at primary school. I was, I got like insanely good grades at my GCSEs. I was always the one that was achieving. I would put my mind to something and I would go and get it. But I also was somebody that felt like I always needed to be in control. I had to arrange, the friendship holidays with one of my other friends. We would always arrange the holidays. I would control, dates with my then husband. I didn't like surprises. I didn't like the unknown. I had to have everything in a way where I knew what was coming and I knew what was happening. And I certainly did not have any big emotional outbursts. I was very together. People would describe me as being so together. And I thought I was so together. I actually really did. Until all of this started to happen, I would have called myself somebody that was really together. I was very strong and I was confident and I didn't let my emotions get the better of me. But what I could see now is that I was suppressing my emotions. Of course I had emotions. We all have emotions. It's the freaking main thing that is certain about being human is we are going to feel shit. But if we don't feel it, we suppress it. We swallow it down. I had no idea that I wasn't feeling my feelings. But because of the pain after I had cheated, I almost had no choice now. I had to start feeling my emotions. In fact, it was so uncomfortable that I can see that the overthinking was the thing that was trying to stop me from actually having to feel the feelings that I was having. And so I was really existing behind this way of being in the world, which meant that actually no one could really get to me. I was always looking perfect from the outside. I was the high achieving one. I looked strong. I wasn't going to be vulnerable because I thought that vulnerability meant weakness. And so I kept people at arm's length. People could never quite get to me. And I can see now, looking back, how frustrating that was for a lot of my friends back then as well, is that they wanted to get to me, but they just couldn't. I'd give them the presentation of Alex, but not really who I was. No one could really see my heart. And when I started working with my mentor, my first mentor, I've had many mentors now, but when I started working with my first one, I remember going in and I was terrified to tell her that I had done something so messy. It really did not fit with the image that I had of myself, that I thought I had to be. And it was so scary to say out loud the most messy, rawest thing that I have ever done. And when I went in to see her, first of all, I felt broken and I just wanted to be fixed. But I also really wanted the answer of, should I tell my husband or not? And instead, she said, let's put that to one side for a moment and let's focus on you. And that was the first time I stopped trying to solve the affair or what was going on in my relationship and started to try to understand myself instead. And what I began to discover was that I had abandoned myself long before I betrayed my husband. I couldn't ask for my needs to be met. In fact, I didn't even know I could have needs. I had no idea what a need was. I remember there was one session with my mentor and she said, how did it go yesterday at the IVF clinic? And I said, yeah, we were walking to the state from the station into the hospital and I just wanted him to put his arm around me. That's all I wanted. And she said, well, Alex, did you ask him to? And I was like, no. And she said, well, how would he know what you need if you don't ask for it? And that moment was like, blew my mind. Of course, he can't read my mind. I'm expecting him to try and read my mind. And he couldn't. And that started to make me realize of all the other times that I haven't asked for what I needed. And if I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what I needed most of the time because I wasn't living from truth. I was living from this mask. I was so fixated on being perfect and achieving and successful that I had no idea what I actually needed. I was too busy making sure that I satisfied everybody else's needs. And I certainly realized that I wasn't able to speak up. I wasn't able to speak my truth. I wasn't able to share what it was that was on my heart or how I was feeling. Sometimes because I genuinely didn't know how I was feeling, again, because I was disconnected from that, but also because I was terrified. I was terrified of conflict. I was terrified of saying something that was going to upset him. I was terrified of us having an argument. I was terrified that if we had an argument, we'd break up. And so I just didn't say anything. I didn't tell him if I felt sad. I didn't tell him if I needed more. I didn't tell him when I felt like I was alone and unseen. I didn't tell him any of these things. I didn't know how. I thought I just had to get on with it. I thought I had to be grateful for the life that I had. You know, because on paper I had a great life. I had a gorgeous house. I had a well-paid job in an industry that was enviable to most people. I had a husband. I was healthy. Yes, I was going through the infertility, but I kind of felt like that was small fry compared to everything else that was going on in my life that I should be grateful for. And all of that time, I didn't realize that I was hiding myself behind this mask. I was wearing a mask of perfection so that no one could actually get to me. And that was one of the hardest things to see. But it really landed for me because, of course, the shame and the guilt was so wild about the affair. Yes, because I had done something outside of my moral value set and that was going to hurt my husband so much, but because I valued myself on being a good girl. I valued myself on being the one that didn't do things like this. But what I started to see again as I started to peel back the layers was that I had actually cheated in every one of my relationships. This was not new, but it was the first time where I really had to start to look at myself, because this was my husband. This was a marriage. This was a whole life that I'd built. And it was terrifying to know what was going to happen if I took the mask off and I showed him how messy I really was underneath. Would anyone love me? Would anyone love me for the real messy version of me? And again, the outside version of me looked so confident. You would never have guessed that I didn't have any self-worth. You wouldn't have guessed that I couldn't love myself because I came across as a very confident, bubbly, even though I hate that word, person. But that confidence that I exuded at the time was inauthentic. It wasn't true. It was what I was presenting to the world. People loved the loud, confident Alex. But is that who I was? I'm not even sure anymore. I don't think it is. And it was funny because that desperation to want to be seen by people, and that is partly through being loud, kind of, if I'm loud then people will see me, but also I was desperate to be seen, like, for my heart from my husband. I really wanted him to see my heart, but what I learned was that I wasn't showing him my heart. I was terrified of showing him my heart. I was terrified of showing him my truth. So even though I wanted to be seen so much, I wouldn't let anyone actually see me. And I took a risk healing in this way because it wasn't standard therapy. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I didn't even consider having therapy. It felt like I didn't need it in some way, even though I was absolutely in the midst of my own trauma. But again, I had just been so good at pushing my own trauma away or my own pain away. I wasn't aware. But when I started to work at the deep soul level, I took a risk that most people didn't understand. And a lot of my friends were kind of worried that I'd joined a cult or something, which I hadn't. But it wasn't mainstream. And it costs a lot of money. It cost more money than standard therapy. But it led me to investing, and it led me to investing a huge amount of money on myself. But it wasn't even the money that healed me in the end at all. In fact, it was the willingness to do this work, the willingness to be uncomfortable, the willingness to feel feelings that I had suppressed for decades, the willingness to be seen as my most messy, raw, vulnerable self, the willingness to meet parts of myself that I'd spent my whole life avoiding. And honestly, it was the willingness to dismantle who I thought I was in the world so I could meet who I truly was. And, that wasn't done through reading books or listening to podcasts. I did do both of those things. But I had to go so many layers deeper than that. I had to go into the body. All of the work that I did was somatic, which means body-based work. And if you don't understand that, you don't have to understand that, but just know that I was doing such deeply transformational work by coming into my nervous system, coming into my body. I was doing coaching work. I was doing plant medicine. I had energy healers, acupuncturists, breathwork facilitators. I also had standard therapy. I was having couples therapy. Like, I really went in on this. I really, truly invested in myself with time and with money, because I knew that I wasn't prepared to live the rest of my life carrying this in the same way. I was so determined. So I went for it. And now, I don't say that I've healed. I also don't think there is a point where we reach, I've healed. But I think that I'm at a point where I can hold my story now. I can hold the regret. I can hold the grief. I can hold the mistakes that I made. And I can still love myself. And so if you're listening to this, carrying shame, if you're desperately trying to forget, if you're trying to figure out why you did it, then I want you to know that the shame isn't necessarily the punishment. The shame might actually be the doorway. Because for me, everything I was trying to avoid became the path back to myself. The best first step that you can make is to come and join the sanctuary. It is a community of women who are in a very similar position to you. We meet twice a month on Zoom, and it might be the first space in which you get to share your truth out loud, and it is met with nothing but compassion and judgment, because that is the first step to being truly free from the shame and the guilt that you're carrying. So if you follow the link in the bio, you can sign up today and be a part of the sisterhood straight away. I'll see you in there. Thank you for listening to the Deeper Love podcast. If today's episode spoke to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're ready to go deeper, you'll find all the ways to work with me in the show notes. Until next time.